good? You guys know the drill. Okay, so we're back here with another tier list thanks to the ban list, okay? This is changing up everything. Basically, every deck got watered down a little bit, but this is a tier list for pre-Maze of Memories and pre-Phantom Nightmares. So this is a current ban list as you would play it as soon as January 1st kicks in. Obviously, after those sets come out, everything changes, but for now, you guys have some regionals, in the next couple of weeks after January 1st kicks in. So let's take a look at the decks that are going to be played and what decks are not going to be that good. We have tier 1 here at the top, which is the best decks, tier 1.5, which are decks that are close to 1 point, like the tier 1 decks, I think, and then tier 2, which is more starting trending more rogue. They can obviously still win, they're decent enough to hold their own, and tier 3, which is more like rogue, like bad-ish. So yeah, let's start off at the top. Infernobos, I actually think they're tier 2, so even though we lost to Sold, apparently this deck can still somewhat combo. You're still using the Synchro Monster, obviously, Angelica. You're still able to somewhat make a board from what I've seen. I know some of the other pro players were actually working on this. Pack and some of the other guys on Twitch were actually working on Infernobos. Apparently there are still a lot of combos, so don't count these guys out yet. They might even be close to tier 1.5. I'm just going to stick them here in tier 2 because from what I've seen, obviously, Assault was one of the biggest techniques in that deck to actually kick off the entire combos, being able to foolish all of your equips as well as your monsters being special summon from the deck. So let's say they're tier 2 for now, but bear in mind that this deck is still very explosive. They have a lot of options. They also got Snatch Steal now, so if they have a way to abuse Snatch Steal somehow, that will be interesting because that can actually be added off of some of their monsters directly from the graveyard, which is kind of hype if you ask me. Being able to really just steal your opponent's monster by returning one of the equip spells from your graveyard is absolutely bonkers. Okay, what next? Tier limits. I actually think they're tier 1.5. I know we lost Kalbeck and Yugioh, but that doesn't mean that the deck is dead by any means. Like, the deck is still very powerful at what it does. You kind of probably have to rely on less milling now, randomness, and actually trying to foolish what you want, whether that's making something like a Beatrice or potentially making like the Shadal monster, using the Shadal engine as well as Cartesia to go in the Grand Guignol to start foolishing stuff that you want. I imagine King of the Swamp will probably get back into the deck, but I still think the deck is very, very solid right now, despite not having those millers. Those were just more RNG cards. Nowadays, we just have to send the exact cards that we want, like the names or the King of the Swamp, and actually start fusing. I still think they're tier 1.5 in my opinion. They're very, very good still. Branded, I would say probably high tier 2, just because Ash Blossom is still like such a clutch card against this deck, and going second for the deck, it's very, very hard to break boards. You don't really have a lot of room for non-engine because the deck is just so thick, so I do still think it's around tier 2 level right now. Sunvalon Rika, I think, is tier 3 because I think they lost their 1-card combo. Now, they're probably still playable, but they've lost a lot. They lost their starter combo as well as the extender combo, like in the grind game. They're not going to be able to go into another Dryas or a healer. So, in my opinion, they're just not that great right now, but I'm waiting for someone to prove me wrong. So, guys, if you have any Sunvalon Rika combos, let us know because I'm actually curious about that deck. I hope it disappears, but we'll see. And let's talk about Flunderies. I think these guys are between tier 2 and tier 1.5. We'll put them 1.5 for now, just because they happen to be one of the decks that actually survived this onslaught of a ban list. The other decks just got absolutely neutered, and Flunderies are still here, basically full power minus the statue. They still have obviously the Featherstorm as well as Shifter, which are very high impact cards, auto win cards on the spot. So that's why I think they're like kind of tier 1.5-ish over tier 2. Fire Kings, I think, are tier 2. I don't think the deck is actually good at all in this current iteration. In fact, it's probably between tier 2 and tier 3. It's a low tier 2. It just doesn't do enough currently what the deck should do after Phantom Nightmare when we get Populous and you can full combo, make Salamangreat, Sunlight Wolf, make Prisoner Princess, make all this huge board with a bunch of cards, Kirin in your hand, everything all set up. But right now, it just doesn't do anything. Like, you're barely ending on any interrupts just off the 1-card starter off of your Baby Ponix. You're not even ending on like anything respectable. You're dumping like a Barong and searching a Kirin. It's just like, huh? That's not that great for what the deck is actually capable of doing after the Phantom Nightmare comes out. So in my opinion, it's just a little bit too frail of a deck as is for now. But that being said, it's still good enough to do well at regionals, especially because people don't read the cards. Rescue Ace is definitely a high tier 1.5. I wouldn't say tier 1 currently, but after Phantom Nightmare comes out, it's absolutely one of the top 3 decks, in my opinion. Just way too good, because Populace didn't even care about Airlifter at 1. You just go search the original simple spells, activate it, summon Hydrant, and boom, you search Airlifter. It's the same deal. You can kind of do that now, but they still have like the 1-card combo off of Airlifter, which they rely heavily on right now, so it does hurt the deck a lot. Obviously, Reinforcement of the Army still makes it so you have 2 copies instead of 4 now. So I still think they're tier 1.5 until Phantom Nightmare comes out. Purely, I still think it's tier 1.5. Definitely not like the best deck by any means, because they do have some kind of consistency hits as of right now with the Delicious to 1 as well as the Sleepy to 2. But the deck's still very, very powerful. Obviously, it gets a lot better if people start playing board breakers as opposed to hand traps, because the Imperms, Veilers, and stuff like that actually do hurt on the cats. So I'll put it at tier 1.5 for right now. I think Sprite variants, I think, are still tier 2. They're obviously getting a lot of consistency boost with the 3rd starter. Previously, they only had 2. But the deck has slowly been power crept by some of the more modernized cards in the recent set. So I don't think it's that good of a deck anymore. But I'm waiting for someone to prove me wrong. You know, the Sprite gods out there in Europe can definitely make something happen with this deck. But I still think they're tier 2 on a general level right now, depending on who plays it, of course. Vanquish, though, I think are a tier 2 deck. They're pretty solid. I mean, we've got Xiaolong as well as a new trap that's like a Snow Dust Devil. It's like a Raigeki or a Dark Hole. But the deck, as it stands, is sometimes weak. It has a tough time breaking boards without hand traps. You can play Shifter, which is still nice. So I still think it's a high tier 2. But I'm just waiting to see this deck actually do well enough to win in an event. It got really close with the YCS coming 2nd place in the last Euro YCS. So it's definitely nothing to scoff at. I would say it's definitely a high tier 2 option. Kashtira, I would say, is a low tier 2. This does get a consistency boost with the 3rd Unicorn. And again, Pot of Prosperity is still at 3 for some hideous reason. So this deck still is able to play all of its starters now, all of its extenders. Obviously, a Rise Heart was the biggest challenge in that deck. So with that gone, I still think the deck is good enough to grind. But it's not nearly as good enough to compete with some of the better decks like Rescue Ace and, you know, whatever the heck we have out there. Salamangreat, I think, is a tier 2 right now. It's just not that great of a deck, given like how the linear the lines are, and now that people kind of know what to hand trap and how to play against it, it's just very meh. I think as long as people are adapting to the other Link decks and playing cards like Phantasme, it makes this deck get hurt in Crossfire too. So I don't think it's that great. It's probably like a mid tier 2, honestly, as of right now. But once we get Prisoner Princess and the fire support, I think it's going to get a lot better. Runic variants, I think, are between tier 2 and tier 1.5. I want to say a high tier 2 just because obviously Joshua Schmidt won the YCS with this deck, but now that people are actually siding and preparing for it with like Cosmic Cyclones and stuff out of the ordinary, I think that it's going to be a lot worse if people actually know how to deal with Runic variants, especially now that the stun deck is out because the Floodgates got hit. I mean, it's still a deck, but it's still like not as good as it used to be when you can play like 3, there can be only 1. But the Bestial Runic variants and like the Sprite variants, like people are going to remember how to deal with this deck, so I think it knocks it down quite a bit because the element of surprise was definitely had with the Runic Bestial deck when people didn't really know what to deal with and how to interact with it. Now that it's kind of spoiled, people are going to know how to play against it and what side against it. Sword Soul, I think, is a tier 2 deck. We got 3 Pot of Desires right now, which is actually a huge boost for the deck. You get 3 Pot of Greed back in this deck. But the deck still is very susceptible to hand traps like Nib, like the high impact stuff. You know, even board breakers like Talon sometimes can hurt. So they're going to have to hedge hard on cards like the Anti-Spell Fragments back behind a Baron de Fleur in their standard setup. But I think it's good enough to beat her too. Orchist is a fun one. I want to say it's just like a lower tier 2. Honestly, guys, we should have had Harpower back way back in the day, and it's just a little bit too late to be getting it now when the Bestials are a thing, DD Crows are a thing, and it's like one Harpower, although it enables 1-card combos, I don't think it's enough for the deck to actually be that capable. It doesn't seem like the end boards are that threatening, you know, putting on like the counter trap with like maybe a Dingirsu or something. It just doesn't feel that great, but you know, I'm waiting to see what brews come out of this. So guys, please prove me wrong and let me know if there's some broken Orchist crap running around the scene, because I do quite like the deck. You know, I'm a fan of older decks. Spellbooks, I don't think we should really debate. These cards have been power crept. It's 10 years ago, almost 11 years ago when this card was actually busted, and it's just been power crept, guys. I just don't think it's that viable. But maybe someone will cook up some crazy like Runic or like Sinful Spoils, some kind of spellbook that just goes infinite pluses and see like making this deck actually good, or like Spellbook of Judgment maybe as a value engine, because this card can actually be used as a pseudo max C in response to your opponent's turn, activating it so any spells they add like on your end phase, you're just gonna fill your hand. So potentially maybe it has like a mini engine of some sort. Waiting to see what you guys think about that. Mechanco, I think, is probably tier 3 because I think Assault was a huge part of their combo, but I still think they can combo, just not as well as previously without Assault. So maybe it's between tier 2.5 and tier 3. I want someone to prove me wrong, so guys, let me know because I'm not really familiar with Mechanicos, to be honest with you, but I know that Simon he went undefeated at the last YCS with them in Swiss, and he said the deck is really, really powerful. Mind you, that was with Assault, so we'll wait to see what happens there. Yes, Shavara / Unchained. I want to say tier 3 right now. It's between tier 2.5 probably. Unfortunately, Shavara was one of the heftiest hits to any of the decks on the ban list. This was the best card in the deck, and starting off the tour guide, you definitely needed multiple copies of this in order to make the DDD. So now you just have to play 2 of the blue dog, and it's just like, why? Oh, it's such a bad brick just to make the DDD. But maybe they'll just adapt decks so they don't even have to play DDD anymore, and maybe go in like more of the Nightmare Griffin lock or something along the sort. So maybe it could be like tier 2, tier 2.5 ish. But I think personally, now that this has gone to 1, it means Shavara cannot actually dodge your monsters under Impermanence or Failure anymore either, which is also a huge hit. So I'm going to put them in tier 3 for now. Vanadium, I think, are tier 1.5. Probably because Droll exists and it hurts them a lot. But that being said, they actually didn't get affected by the ban list at all, so I still think the deck is good enough to hold its own. Notice how I'm not putting any of these decks in tier 1, guys. I just don't think there's like a definitive tier 1 deck at the moment other than this one, Labyrinth. I actually think these guys are good enough to be very high tier 1.5 or tier 1 because they just did not get hit by the ban list. And the deck is really, really hard to deal with, especially now that they have basically full power everything. Once Maze of Memories comes out, we get the new cards as well. We get Rumpel Teufel in Phantom Nightmare, which is a really, really good anti-meta card. And then we get the Transaction Rollback in the actual Maze of Memories, which is an insane card that can be discarded off of the furnitures and be activated in the graveyard. So I think Labs currently are very, very high tier 1 or high tier 1.5 rather. I still think they're the deck to beat currently because every other deck got hit. Obviously, Vanadium didn't get hit, but Drone Lockford kind of keeps them in check, whereas Lab, there's not one single card that deals with their entire deck. Even something like a Harpy's Feather Duster sometimes isn't enough. So yeah. Dragon Link, I think, are a low tier 2, or unfortunately with this deck, the release of the Typhon actually makes it so this deck is hurt a lot because previously there were no easy ways to get rid of the Burrow and, right, the Link monster that had undestructible, can't be affected by monster effects, all that yada yada good stuff. Now you can just out it with one Typhon, which makes it so the deck actually like is a lot weaker in my opinion. And on top of that, people are playing Bystials and other stuff to deal with the deck. So I think the deck is like a tier 2 right now. But that being said, it's still very, very powerful. It's just Typhon is really, really hard card to deal with. And last but not least, Centurion, I think are tier 2, between tier 1.5 to 2. I'll put it high tier 2 right now. I think the deck is actually really, really the type of deck that if you don't deal with it, if you don't prepare your side deck with like Cosmic Cyclones or hand traps, then you're going to get punished hard by the Calamity. Actually, I'm surprised Calamity actually survived. Now that I think about it, that's just another card that should have been banned. So I think this guy is probably around high tier 2 level. Just make sure you guys are already siding Cosmics because they do have good crossover with the other matchups in the metagame. And you can also deal with Labyrinth, like if they play Floodgates or anything along the sorts. So yeah, that's about all I had for the tier list. What do you guys think? Are we wrong about some of the decks here? Do you think anything is missing that we should be aware about that actually boosts some of these decks higher than they are? Are there any decks that we're actually missing here? Because I just took a quick glance at the decks that were doing well last format. Maybe we missed a couple. Let us know in the comments below. If you guys haven't subscribed already, definitely do so to support the channel. And we'll see you next in this next video. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye, guys. Bye-bye.